Hello and welcome to Wild Love Story. Today, we bring you an extraordinary story, one of heartbreak, betrayal, and a choice so bold that it left everyone who heard it stunned. This is the story of James, a devoted husband who came home one evening to find his world shattered in the most unimaginable way. What he witnessed in his bedroom would change his life forever. Stick with us as James takes you through every raw detail of his journey. This is not just a story, it's a testament to how far love can push us when trust is destroyed. And before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your next unforgettable tale is just one click away. So, let's get started with James's incredible story. I still remember the first time I saw Ava. She was standing at the corner of the library, her hair catching the sunlight through the window. She had this way about her, like she didn't even realize how captivating she was. I had no idea, in that moment, that she would change my life forever. We met in the most ordinary way. A chance encounter. She needed help finding a book, and I happened to be nearby. We struck up a conversation, and what began as small talk quickly became something more. She was funny, sharp, and kind, the kind of person who made you feel like the most important person in the room. Over time, our bond grew. I proposed to Ava on a cold December evening under a canopy of fairy lights, surrounded by the laughter of friends and family. It felt like a dream, a perfect beginning to what I thought would be a perfect life together. And for a long time, it was. We built our life piece by piece, like any couple would. Lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, long drives to nowhere just to escape the city, and quiet nights on the couch watching our favorite shows. We laughed a lot, argued sometimes, but always made up before going to bed. Ava had this way of calming me, of making me believe that no matter what happened, we would always have each other. I trusted her completely. Ava wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. I told her everything, my fears, my dreams, my insecurities. And I believed she did the same. I believed we had something solid, something that could weather anything. People would tell us we were lucky to have each other. They'd say things like, "You two are such a perfect match," or, "You can see how much love there is between you." I believed them. I really did. And for years, I was proud of the life we had built together. Ava had ambitions of her own. She was driven, smart, and good at her job. I supported her completely, encouraged her every step of the way. I loved watching her succeed because her happiness felt like my own. That's what love is, isn't it? Celebrating each other's victories, standing together through life's challenges, trusting without question. Looking back now, I see how much I believed in the story we had built. How deeply I wanted to believe it would last forever. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I thought we had the kind of love others envied, unbreakable. How wrong I was. It started with small things I didn't even notice at first. Ava began spending more time at work. She always had a demanding schedule, so I didn't think much of it initially. She'd come home late, tired, sometimes skipping dinner entirely, saying she had eaten at the office. I brushed it off. After all, we had always supported each other's careers, and I trusted her implicitly. But then there were other changes, subtle ones. She became guarded with her phone. She'd keep it face down on the table, which wasn't like her. Ava used to leave her phone lying around without a second thought. Now, it was always within arm's reach, locked, and occasionally accompanied by a slight, almost imperceptible tension when it buzzed. There were moments that stood out. I remember one evening vividly. We were sitting on the couch, and her phone lit up with a notification. Normally, she wouldn't even bat an eye. But this time, she reached for it so quickly that it startled me. I asked her casually, "Who's texting you?" She smiled, but it felt off. "Oh, it's just work stuff," she said, placing the phone face down again. Ava was still there, physically, but emotionally, it felt like she was slipping away. There was a time when she'd laugh uncontrollably at my jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. She had this infectious laugh that would light up the entire room. Now, it felt like I was invisible to her. I'd say something, and she'd respond with a polite smile or a distracted, "That's nice." It was as if her mind was always elsewhere. I remember one Friday night. Fridays used to be our night, take out and a movie, our little tradition. That night, she came home late again. I had ordered her favorite sushi and set up her favorite movie, hoping it might lift her spirits. When she walked through the door, she barely noticed. "I'm exhausted," she said, brushing past me. She kissed me on the cheek, a quick, almost mechanical gesture, and disappeared into the bedroom. I sat there for a long time, staring at the untouched sushi and the paused movie on the screen. Something didn't feel right. But I told myself I was overthinking it. Everyone goes through phases, right? Work gets stressful, life gets busy. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough credit. Still, the changes piled up. Our conversations became shorter, our time together more distant. She stopped asking about my day. Ava, who used to listen to me ramble on about the most mundane things, now seemed distracted whenever we spoke. She'd nod and murmur, but her eyes weren't on me. I started noticing patterns. She began working on weekends, something she had never done before. I asked her about it once, and she shrugged. "It's just a busy season at work," she said. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The bed beside me was empty. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with her laptop. She said she was catching up on emails. I stood there for a moment, watching her. Her face was illuminated by the glow of the screen, her expression unreadable. Something inside me whispered that this wasn't just about work. There were moments I wanted to confront her, but every time, I hesitated. What would I even say? Ava wasn't doing anything blatantly wrong. There was no screaming fight, no dramatic confession. It was all so quiet. Quiet, but undeniable. I started questioning myself. Was I imagining things? Was I just being paranoid? After all, nothing was definitive. I'd replay conversations in my head, trying to find clues that might not have even been there. I hated feeling like this, like I was doubting the person I trusted most in the world. Then came the night we went to a friend's party. Ava was unusually distant the entire evening. She excused herself multiple times to take work calls, leaving me alone with people who kept asking, "Is everything okay between you two?" I laughed it off, saying she was just busy. But deep down, their questions hit a nerve I didn't want to admit was raw. Later that night, when we got home, I tried to talk to her. "Ava," I said, "is everything okay? You've been so distant lately." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she said. "Work has just been overwhelming." Her words sounded right, but they didn't feel right. I told myself to stop overthinking, to trust her like I always had. But a part of me couldn't shake the unease. It lingered, growing stronger with every unanswered question, every late night, every guarded look. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. I wish I had asked the hard questions. But I didn't. I let myself believe it was just a phase, that things would go back to normal. I was wrong again. The signs I had been trying so hard to ignore were no longer whispers in the back of my mind. They were loud, blaring signals that something wasn't right. And soon, I couldn't avoid them any longer. It was a Thursday evening, and I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Ava was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. I could see her from where I stood, the glow of the screen lighting up her face. Her phone buzzed, just a small vibration on the table. Her reaction wasn't small, though. She snatched it up so quickly that it caught my attention. For a split second, her face flashed with something: panic, concern. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a practiced calm. She turned her body slightly away from me, her fingers flying over the screen as she typed out a response. I tried to act casual. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She didn't look up. "Just a colleague," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something about the way she avoided eye contact that made my stomach tighten. I didn't press her. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I didn't want to come across as suspicious or controlling. But that small moment stuck with me, gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I saw her phone again. It was on the nightstand, face down, as it always was these days. I couldn't help but wonder what was on it. Who was she texting so quickly? Why did she seem so guarded about it? The questions kept me awake long after she had fallen asleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Eventually, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. The next day, I left work early and came home unexpectedly. I told myself it was just to spend some extra time with Ava, maybe surprise her. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. When I walked into the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. Ava's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I called out to her, but there was no response. That's when I heard it, a low murmur, coming from upstairs. My heart started to pound. I climbed the stairs slowly, my breath catching with each step. When I reached our bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear her voice, hushed and urgent. "No, I can't talk right now," she said. There was a pause, and then, "I told you I'll handle it." Handle what? I froze outside the door, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My mind was racing, my body frozen in place. I felt like I was intruding on something, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Ava's voice dropped lower, and I couldn't make out the rest of the conversation. After a few minutes, I heard the call end. The silence that followed was deafening. I stepped away from the door, retreating back down the hallway before she could catch me. My hands were trembling. I didn't know what to do or how to process what I had just heard. That night, Ava acted like nothing was wrong. She was cheerful, even affectionate. She kissed me goodnight and said she loved me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman lying next to me was hiding something. The next few days were a blur of suspicion and doubt. I started noticing more things, patterns I had ignored before. Her phone always seemed to buzz late at night. She was spending more time at the office, taking calls in private, and avoiding questions about her day. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. While Ava was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, using the passcode I had seen her enter countless times before. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were messages from her boss, messages that weren't about work. They were flirty, intimate, the kind of messages no married woman should be exchanging with anyone other than her husband. My heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My hands started trembling so badly that I almost dropped the phone. That night, I didn't confront her. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say or how to say it. I felt like I was drowning, like the walls of my life were closing in around me. The next day, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, all of it. So, I waited. I waited until the moment I could no longer avoid what I knew was coming. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ava had told me she was going to the office to catch up on some work. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't sit around and pretend everything was fine anymore. I got in my car and drove to her office, but when I got there, her car wasn't in the parking lot. That's when I knew. I drove home, my heart pounding in my chest. When I walked through the door, the house was eerily quiet. I headed upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The bedroom door was closed, but I could hear muffled voices on the other side. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. When I opened the door, the sight before me made my blood run cold. Ava was there, with her boss. On our bed. I stood there, frozen, unable to move or speak. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built my life with had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Ava looked up, her face a mix of shock and guilt. Her boss scrambled to cover himself, stammering something I couldn't even hear over the roaring in my ears. In that moment, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was destroyed. The silence in that moment was deafening, but inside, my mind was a storm. Time slowed to a crawl, each second stretching endlessly as my heart shattered into pieces I wasn't sure I could ever put back together. I stood there, paralyzed, as my world fell apart in that moment. Ava looked at me, her face a mixture of shock and panic. Her boss, a man I had only met once at a work event, was fumbling to gather his clothes, muttering incoherent apologies. But none of it mattered. The damage was done. Ava, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. What is this? She froze, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. James. I can explain, she stammered, clutching the sheet around her. Her words hung in the air, empty and meaningless. Explain. How do you explain something like this? How do you justify tearing apart 10 years of trust, 10 years of love, in a single moment of betrayal? I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming in short gasps. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in around me. I wanted to scream, to yell, to demand answers. But all I could do was stand there, staring at the two people who had just shattered my life. Her boss, now fully dressed, tried to step past me. James, look, I'm sorry, he said, his voice trembling. This was a mistake. A mistake. That word cut through me like a knife. I turned to him, my voice cold and steady. A mistake is spilling coffee. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. I gestured at the bed, at him, at Ava. This isn't a mistake. This is a choice. He didn't say another word. He just lowered his head and hurried out of the room, leaving me alone with Ava. She reached out to me, her voice trembling. James, please, let me explain. I took a step back, shaking my head. Explain. Explain what, Ava? That you've been lying to me? That you've been sneaking around with your boss while I've been here, trusting you, loving you? Tears streamed down her face as she tried to approach me. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. You didn't mean for this to happen. Ava, you don't accidentally end up in bed with someone else. You made a choice to betray me, to throw everything we built together away. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I was stressed, James. Work has been so overwhelming, and I felt disconnected. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And he was there. He listened to me. Her words hit me like a series of punches. Disconnected? She felt disconnected. How was I supposed to know she felt that way if she never told me? How could she justify turning to someone else instead of talking to me, her husband? I shook my head, my voice trembling with anger and pain. You felt disconnected, so instead of talking to me, you turned to him. Do you have any idea what you've done to me, to us? I gave you everything, Ava. I trusted you. I believed in you. And this is how you repay me. She fell to her knees, her hands covering her face. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I still love you. Please, don't let this be the end of us. I wanted to believe her. A part of me still loved her, still clung to the memories of the life we had built together. But the pain was too much. The betrayal was too deep. I couldn't look at her without seeing the image of her in bed with another man. I felt a lump rise in my throat as the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. My voice broke as I said, "You don't destroy someone you love, Ava. You don't rip their heart out and expect them to just forgive you." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't bear to be in that room, to see her, to feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. I turned and walked out, my legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. As I reached the front door, I heard her voice behind me, desperate and pleading. "James, please. Don't go. We can fix this. Please." But I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. It felt like I was waking up from a nightmare, but the pain in my chest reminded me that this was real. This was my life now, a life that had been irreparably changed in the span of a single moment. I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't be there, couldn't be near her. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. I thought about the life we had shared, the promises we had made to each other. I thought about the future I had envisioned, a future that no longer existed. And as I drove aimlessly through the night, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all a lie? The laughter, the promises, the moments that felt so real, had any of it mattered? Or had I been blind this entire time, living in a fantasy I'd created to shield myself from the truth? These questions circled endlessly in my mind, dragging me deeper into a darkness I didn't know how to escape. I drove for hours, the city lights giving way to long stretches of empty roads. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. The house, the bed, the memories, they were tainted now, stained by betrayal. Eventually, I pulled over at an empty gas station, parked beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, and let the silence envelop me. For the first time since I opened that door, I allowed myself to cry. Not the restrained, silent tears I'd shed before, but deep, guttural sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. When the tears finally subsided, I sat there for a long time, staring out into the void. That's when the realization hit me, I couldn't stay. Not just in the car, or the city, or the house. I couldn't stay in this life. I had to leave. The decision wasn't easy. Every fiber of my being screamed against it. This was my home, my life, my identity. But the pain was too much, the betrayal too raw. Staying would mean confronting it every single day, and I didn't think I was strong enough for that. I drove back home in the early hours of the morning. The house was dark when I arrived, and for a moment, I sat in the driveway, staring at it. This place had been my sanctuary, a space filled with love and warmth. Now, it felt like a stranger's house, cold and unwelcoming. I went inside quietly, not wanting to wake Ava. The thought of seeing her again, of hearing her voice, was unbearable. I made my way upstairs to the guest room, the one we never used, and closed the door behind me. For the next few hours, I packed. I didn't take much. Just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my passport, some cash I kept stashed away, and my laptop. As I moved around the room, each item I picked up felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the memories tied to them. I avoided our bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to step inside, to see the bed where everything had fallen apart. When I was done packing, I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a piece of paper. My hand trembled as I wrote the words that would end our life together. Ava, I can't do this. I can't stay. I need time, space, and distance to process everything that's happened. Please don't try to contact me. This is something I have to do for myself. I loved you once, with everything I had, and maybe a part of me always will. But you broke me, Ava. And I don't know if I can ever forgive that. Goodbye. I stared at the note for a long time, my eyes scanning the words over and over. They felt inadequate, but what else was there to say? No words could capture the depth of my pain or the finality of my decision. I left the note on the kitchen counter, where I knew she would find it. Then, I reached for my phone. Deleting her photos was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every image felt like erasing a piece of my life, of the love I had once cherished so deeply. The photo from our wedding day, the ones from our vacations, the candid shots of her laughing at my stupid jokes, they were all gone in a matter of minutes. As I stared at the now empty gallery, I realized it wasn't just her photos I was deleting. It was our life, our memories, our story. I wasn't just leaving her, I was leaving the life we built together. I turned off my phone and placed it on the counter next to the note. I didn't want to take it with me. It felt like an anchor, something that would tie me to a past I was desperately trying to escape. The sun was just starting to rise as I walked out the door, my bag slung over my shoulder. The air was crisp and cool, the world still quiet and untouched by the chaos of the day. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. Each mile I put between myself and that house felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders, but it also left an ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore. As the city disappeared in my rearview mirror, I found myself thinking about what lay ahead. I had no plan, no destination. All I knew was that I needed to start over, to find a way to heal. The road stretched out before me, endless and uncertain. And for the first time in years, I was truly alone. The road stretched endlessly before me, a thin line cutting through the unknown. The hum of the engine and the occasional whoosh of passing cars were my only companions. It was strange, this feeling of complete solitude. For the past 10 years, Ava had been there, her presence woven into every aspect of my life. Now, she was gone, and I didn't know who I was without her. I drove until the sun was high in the sky, finally pulling into a small town I'd never heard of before. It wasn't a place I had planned to go, it just happened to be where I ran out of energy to keep driving. The town was quiet, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other. It felt foreign to me, and maybe that's why I decided to stay. I checked into a modest motel at the edge of town, the kind with outdated floral bedspreads and creaky floors. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I handed over cash for a week's stay. It was the anonymity I needed, no questions, no explanations. Just a room and a place to sleep. The first few days were the hardest. The silence was suffocating. I'd sit in that tiny motel room, staring at the walls, replaying everything that had happened. My mind was a whirlwind of memories, questions, and regrets. What could I have done differently? Could I have saved us if I had tried harder? Was there something I missed, some sign that things were falling apart? At night, the silence was deafening. I missed her even though I hated her. I missed the sound of her laughter, the way she hummed to herself while cooking, the warmth of her beside me in bed. And yet, every time I thought of her, all I could see was the image of her in our bedroom, with him. The pain was overwhelming. There were moments I thought about calling her, about going back. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. And without trust, what did we have? I knew I couldn't stay in that motel forever. The money I had wouldn't last long, and I needed something to occupy my mind, to distract me from the endless cycle of pain and regret. So, I started looking for work. It wasn't easy. My resume wasn't exactly designed for small-town jobs, but I managed to find a position at a local hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a routine, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. The people at the store were kind, though I kept my distance at first. I wasn't ready to talk about myself, to share my story with strangers. But over time, I found myself opening up, just a little. There was an older man named Frank who worked the morning shift with me. He didn't pry, didn't ask too many questions, but he had a way of making me feel seen. One day, as we were stacking shelves, he said, "You've got the look of someone who's been through the ringer. Whatever it is, kid, just know you'll get through it. Takes time, but you'll get there." His words stuck with me. They didn't take away the pain, but they gave me a sliver of hope, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. As the weeks turned into months, I started to settle into my new life. The days were still hard, but they were bearable. I found a small apartment above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread wafting up every morning. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I began to create a routine, work during the day, long walks in the evening, and journaling at night. Writing became my therapy, a way to process everything I was feeling. I'd pour my thoughts onto the page, unfiltered and raw. Some nights, the tears would come as I wrote, but I didn't fight them. I let myself feel everything, no matter how painful. There were still moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Seeing couples walking hand in hand or hearing a love song on the radio would send me spiraling back into the memories of what I'd lost. But those moments became less frequent. Slowly, the ache in my chest began to dull. One evening, as I sat on the small balcony outside my apartment, I realized something. I was starting to feel like myself again. Not the version of me I was with Ava, but a new version, one that had been forged through heartbreak and loss. I thought about her often, about what she might be doing, if she missed me, if she regretted what she had done. But I didn't let myself dwell on it. She had made her choice, and I was making mine. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't constant, but it was there, a small glimmer of hope in the darkness. And as I sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something else. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. But new beginnings aren't always clean. They come with the shadows of the past, the loose threads of a life that still lingers even when you're trying to move forward. And for me, those threads came in the form of Ava's attempts to reach me. The first voicemail came about 2 weeks after I left. I hadn't been checking my phone, it was still off, tucked away in a drawer. But curiosity got the better of me one evening, and I powered it up. The screen lit up with a flood of missed calls and messages. Her voice was the first thing I heard. "James, please, if you're listening to this, just call me back. I need to talk to you. I know I messed up, but I need you to hear me out." I listened to the message twice, her words echoing in the quiet of my small apartment. Her voice sounded raw, desperate, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Over the next few weeks, the messages kept coming. Some were tearful, others angry, and a few were eerily calm, like she was trying to act as though everything could go back to normal if I just called her. "James, I know you're hurt, but we can fix this. Please. Don't throw everything away. Why are you ignoring me? You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk. I miss you, James. I miss us. Please come home." The emails started not long after. They were longer than the voicemails, filled with apologies and explanations. She talked about how she felt lonely, how she made a mistake, how she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. "I know you probably hate me," one email read. "And I deserve it. But I love you, James. I never stopped loving you. Please give me a chance to prove that." Then there were the messages from mutual friends. Ava must have told them what happened, her version of it, at least, because they started reaching out, too. "Hey, man, Ava's been a mess. I'm not saying what she did was okay, but maybe you two should talk. You've been through so much together. James, I saw Ava the other day. She looks awful. She really wants to talk to you. Just think about it." Each message was a reminder of the life I had left behind, a life that was still chasing me even as I tried to move forward. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to pick up the phone, to go back to the life we had before everything fell apart. There were nights when I'd sit in the darkness, her voice replaying in my head, and wonder if I was being too harsh. But there was another part of me, a bigger part, that wanted her to feel my pain. I wanted her to know what it was like to lose everything, to wake up every day with the weight of betrayal pressing down on your chest. Forgiveness felt like letting her off the hook, like saying what she did was okay. And it wasn't. One night, after a particularly long shift at work, I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, it was Ava's. My heart sank as I stood there, staring at it, the paper heavy in my hands. I took it inside and sat down at the small table in my kitchen. For a long time, I just stared at it, my mind racing with questions. What could she possibly say that she hadn't already said in her voicemails and emails? Finally, I opened it. James. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how deeply I regret what I did. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I lost the best thing I ever had because of it. I don't expect you to come back. I don't even expect you to reply. But I hope, someday, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, James. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting that I let you go. With all my love. Ava. I read the letter 3 times. Each word felt like a dagger, cutting into the wall I had built around my heart. Her words were sincere, at least, they felt sincere. But sincerity didn't erase what had happened. It didn't erase the image of her in our bedroom, with him. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't respond either. The messages and letters eventually stopped. Whether she gave up or decided to move on, I don't know. And I didn't ask. But even as the silence returned, her words stayed with me. They lingered in the corners of my mind, resurfacing at the most unexpected moments. And while I wasn't ready to forgive her, a small part of me wondered if, someday, I might. That thought lingered in the back of my mind, haunting me at times. Not because I wanted to return to her, I knew that wasn't possible. But because I was beginning to understand that holding on to the anger, the resentment, the pain, it wasn't hurting Ava. It was only hurting me. Still, letting go wasn't something I could do overnight. The betrayal had cut too deeply, and the scars it left behind weren't the kind that healed quickly. I carried the weight of it with me everywhere I went, like an invisible anchor dragging me down. Eventually, I realized I needed help. I couldn't navigate this on my own anymore. So, I started therapy. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect. Sitting in a room with a stranger, bearing my soul, wasn't something that came easily to me. But my therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellis, had a way of making me feel heard without judgment. Our sessions were hard at first. Talking about Ava, about what she did and how it made me feel, forced me to confront emotions I had been trying to bury. There were moments when I wanted to walk out, to never come back. But I didn't. Dr. Ellis once said something that stuck with me: forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from the hold their actions have on your life. It was a simple idea, but it felt monumental to me. For so long, I had been clinging to my anger like it was the only thing keeping me afloat. I thought that if I let it go, I would sink. But what I was starting to understand was that the anger was the anchor. It was the thing holding me in place, preventing me from moving forward. Around this time, I also started journaling again. I had always been someone who found solace in writing, but I had stopped after leaving Ava. It felt too raw, too vulnerable. But one night, after a particularly heavy therapy session, I picked up my pen and let the words pour out. At first, it was just a stream of consciousness, angry, messy, unfiltered. I wrote about the pain, the betrayal, the nights I spent questioning everything. But as the weeks went on, my writing began to shift. It became less about Ava and more about me. I started writing about the things I wanted for myself: peace, happiness, self-worth. I wrote about the man I wanted to be, the life I wanted to build. Slowly, the act of writing became less about purging my pain and more about imagining a future where that pain didn't define me. And then, there was the day I met someone new. Her name was Clara. We met at a bookstore, of all places. I was browsing the self-help section, trying to find something that might complement my therapy, when she approached me. She had a warm smile and an easy confidence about her. "That one's good," she said, pointing to the book in my hand. "But if you're looking for something that really gets to the heart of things, try this." She handed me another book, one I hadn't noticed before. I thanked her, and we struck up a conversation. It was the first time in a long time that I felt at ease talking to someone. Clara wasn't like Ava. She didn't dominate the conversation or try to impress me. She was genuine, curious, and kind. We ended up sitting in the cafe inside the bookstore, talking for hours. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more and more. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of opening myself up to someone new felt terrifying. What if I got hurt again? What if I wasn't ready? But Clara had a way of easing my fears. She didn't push me to move faster than I was ready for, didn't pry into my past. She was just there, patient and understanding. Through her, I began to see that not everyone was like Ava. Not everyone would betray my trust or break my heart. Slowly, I started to let my guard down. One evening, as we were walking through the park, Clara said something that caught me off guard. "You know, you talk about your past like it's this heavy burden you'll always have to carry. But it doesn't have to be. You can put it down whenever you're ready." Her words echoed what Dr. Ellis had been trying to tell me for months, but hearing them from Clara made them feel different. More real. That night, I sat on my balcony, thinking about everything I had been through. The pain, the heartbreak, the anger, it had all shaped me, but it didn't have to define me. I realized that forgiveness wasn't for Ava, it was for me. Forgiving her didn't mean excusing what she did or inviting her back into my life. It meant freeing myself from the weight of her betrayal. It meant choosing to let go of the anger and resentment so I could move forward. The next day, I wrote one last letter. It wasn't for Ava, it was for myself. I wrote about everything I had been through, everything I had learned. I wrote about the pain and how it had shaped me, but also about the strength I had found in surviving it. And at the end of the letter, I wrote the words that I had been holding back for so long. "I forgive you, Ava. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to let this go." As I folded the letter and tucked it away, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes all at once, washing over you like a wave. It was quieter than that, like the first rays of sunlight after a long, dark night. I wasn't fully healed, not yet. But I was on my way. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that I could get there. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how far I've come. There were moments when I thought the pain would never go away, when the weight of betrayal felt like it would crush me. But here I am, standing on the other side of it, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never let betrayal define your worth. For so long, I thought Ava's actions said something about me, about who I was as a husband, as a man. I questioned myself endlessly. Was I not good enough? Did I fail her in some way? Could I have done something differently to stop it from happening? But here's the truth I've come to understand: her betrayal wasn't about me. It was about her. Her choices, her flaws, her struggles. It took me a long time to separate myself from her actions, to stop blaming myself for something I couldn't control. If you're watching this and you've been through something similar, I want you to hear this: betrayal is not a reflection of your worth. It's easy to get lost in the pain, to let it consume you, to let it convince you that you're somehow unworthy of love or happiness. But that's not true. You are not defined by someone else's choices. Healing isn't a straight path. It's messy, it's painful, and it takes time. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, only to be dragged back down by a memory or a wave of anger. But every step forward, no matter how small, mattered. Every moment I chose to focus on myself, on my own growth, was a step toward freedom. I know that not everyone gets closure in the way they hope for. For me, closure wasn't about getting answers from Ava. It wasn't about hearing the words, "I'm sorry," or even forgiving her for her sake. Closure came when I stopped looking for it in her and started finding it in myself. Therapy helped me understand my emotions, but it was the little things, journaling, meeting new people, creating a routine, that truly helped me rebuild. Those small acts of self-care reminded me that I was still capable of joy, of connection, of moving forward. And then there was forgiveness. Forgiveness was the hardest part of all. It's not something you wake up one day and decide, it's a process. It took months for me to let go of the anger, to stop replaying the betrayal in my mind. And even now, forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. It doesn't mean I condone what Ava did. It simply means I chose to stop letting her actions control my life. I'll never know if Ava truly understood the depth of the pain she caused me. I'll never know if she's happy, if she's moved on, or if she still thinks about what happened. And honestly, I don't need to know. What matters is that I've moved on. I've learned to trust again, not blindly, but cautiously, with intention. I've learned that it's okay to be vulnerable, that opening yourself up to love again doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're brave. And most importantly, I've learned that I deserve happiness. I deserve love that is honest, that is kind, that is real. To anyone listening who has faced betrayal, I want you to remember this: you are not alone. Your pain is valid, your healing is possible, and your future is brighter than you can imagine. So, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have stayed and tried to rebuild, or would you have left like I did? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, if you want more real, raw tales of love, heartbreak, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to Wild Love Story. Turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping story. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for sharing this journey with me. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, love is out there, and you deserve nothing less than the best.